Hello everyone. I wanted to give you some alternative builds due to my last recording and also to give you some alternative builds to work with. As a quick recap, I just did a recording to share my thoughts on Diablo and I was asking for some balance. I know it's a minor nitpick, but whatever. It just would have been nice to see. In the two recordings prior to that, I gave both a Paladin and Amazon build. The Amazon build was a hybrid magic arrow with charged strike, and the Paladin build was Vengeance with Zeal. I did say that I would be done with builds, and that's true. As I stated in the prior recording, it's a lot easier for me to modify a pre-existing build than it is to create a new one from scratch. So I don't mind making an alternative build because the work is mostly already done. I just have to switch around a few things, and from there it's done. Okay, before I get into the alternative builds, I need to go over some mechanics/numbers. Starting with shields. Okay, shields have a lot more to them going on than just the listed block percent. Dexterity affects your block chance, as well as your attack rating. Having dexterity is a good thing for really any melee build. How much, though, is dependent on the build's target goal. When you are doing a build, you want to make sure that you are only buying the stats that you need to accomplish that target goal. Because you need to spend a lot on vitality, unfortunately. In order to survive hell difficulty while really farming, you really do need a lot of life to pull that off. That's why you put a cap on what stats you're buying. That said, let me go in and branch into vitality. Let me tab over real quickly. Okay. You will notice that in my Amazon build, I did list Harlequin Crest as a alternative to the Griffin's Eye helmet. Griffin's Eye helmet is what every Javson build uses, so unfortunately it's going to be a very expensive item to acquire. And Harlequin Crest is very common. But the main reason I'm pulling it up is not because of that, it's because I want to show you that it says plus to life. Now let me tab over. Okay, this is Dream, which is a common helmet rune word in certain builds. You'll notice that it says plus 10 to vitality and 5% to life. Just like I was mentioning with the prior recording, percentages only work if it's at high base. Amazon and Paladin work differently. I'd have to double check, but off the top of my head, I think Amazon's 2 health per 1 vitality, and Paladin's 3. I can confirm that and make an edit in the description if need be, but I'm pretty sure that's correct. So yes, you can see that 10 vitality, assuming I have the numbers in my head correct, would only mean 20 health for Amazon and 30 health for Paladin. Harlequin Crest is up to 148 life, depending on your level. That means Harlequin Crest only has to get up to 40 life to be better than 10 vitality. That's how the math works out. So, yes, this is actually a really good helmet for the fact that it's flat life, mana, and damage reduction. Because it completely negates that whole conversion ratio. And on top of that, you're getting damage reduction, which is kind of hard to come by. Damage reduction is the one that's going to reduce the physical damage that's coming in. So yes, this is an extremely good helmet for not just defense, but also for farming. But either way, I want to use it as an example to kind of show you where the numbers are with life and why it takes so much vitality to really get anywhere. But yes, okay, so now that we got that out of the way, let me get into the build. I'll start with the Paladin because I only have one alternative for the Paladin build, whereas I have 2 with the Amazon. So Paladin will be the shortest. Okay, let me tap over. Okay. If you've listened to the prior recording, you'll remember me saying that flat damage can be better than percent damage in certain cases because of the base damage. Rune words only work with white items. They don't work with blue, yellow, or uniques. So, for the Paladin builds, you're going to be making a change from Infinity to Grief. Now, there is going to be a very big change between Grief and Infinity. Let me go ahead and tab over to Infinity. This is what it looks like here. So you can see that Grief does help you with the target defense and does a lot of damage, but really that's about all you're looking at there. My Poleaxe Infinity Vengeance build is also damage, but it's a different way of doing damage because you'll notice that it gives you a level 12 conviction, which lowers their defense and resistances, on top of a -2 enemy lightning resistance. So this is a very different way of doing damage, and probably a better way of doing damage because it's lowering the resistances, which can in turn result in possibly higher damage. Not only that, you get some utility out of this because you'll notice that Infinity does give you 40% chance of crushing blow, which is a debuff more or less, and 35%, 35% faster run, walk, and vitality. Which on the Paladin, it's perfectly fine to use that because again they have a very high conversion ratio. But the faster run, walk combined with the reach of the Poleaxe, which is a 4 reach, same as the Amazon Spear, is a pretty lethal combo, not just for monsters but PvP as well. It means that it makes it possible for you to really reach people that rely on builds that run, like assassin builds. There are certain assassin builds that rely on running away and letting a skill do damage. So if you can chase down an assassin and don't give them any time to start that crap, then you can certainly win PvP pretty easily with that. So there are some big differences between Infinity and Grief. I just wanted to point that out real quickly. Now that I've pointed out Grief and Infinity's differences, this build will be using Grief with a one-handed weapon. And Phoenix. So let me tab over. Okay, so the reason you're combining Phoenix with Grief is because Grief is a lot of flat damage. And you will notice that with Phoenix, it will increase the damage based on percentages. So you're combining flat damage with a percentage, which will cause the math to go through the roof. As a matter of fact, if you do the math, you can do double the damage of the Poleaxe with one-handed weapons when you combine the two. So, yeah, this is pretty insane stuff. But again, remember that Conviction does lower the resistances. And on top of that, Phoenix is only minus fire resistances on the enemy, which is a very common resistance. So you're not going to get very far in comparison with Phoenix to Infinity. But just be aware that it does have some other bonuses here, besides causing your one-handed to do, Grief to do insane damage. You also get maximum fire resistances, maximum lightning resistance, and fire absorb. There are certainly some good stuff in here, so I would for sure use Phoenix all the time. That said, let me go and talk about which weapons you can use, because you'll notice that Grief is swords or axes. So let's see, is it this tab? Yep. Okay, so there are a couple of options for Grief, because it's swords or axes. You can use the Berserker's Axe, which is really more strength than dexterity, and that's fine because a lot of your shields do require strength. So that's perfectly fine. Let's see, your other option is... There it is. And your other option is Phase Blade. Now, Phase Blade requires a lot of dexterity, and that I think can be feasible if you were to use plus dexterity ring and amulet. I wouldn't make a Paladin build that runs on Dexterity, because then that would make leveling up very difficult, because then you wouldn't have access to some of the other one-handeds that you will loot along the way. So you really do need a combination of strength and dexterity to achieve leveling, but at in-game you should be able to get plus dexterity to make Phase Blade work. I think Phase Blade would be better for this build, because even though its flat damage is lower than Berserker's Axe, it really doesn't matter with Grief, but also because it's indestructible. Whenever you craft a rune word, it carries over that trait, if you will. For example, Phase Blade is indestructible, which means it will carry over the indestructible. Scourge, which is that flail, it's plus 50% damage to undead. That carries over in rune words. Those are two examples right there. So I would say Phase Blade would be really good, because plus dexterity means not just attack rating, but block chance in this build. So it's one of those, you might as well just do it, because it's more gold per run, essentially. With it being indestructible, that means you don't have a repair bill on the sword, which is kind of nice. So I would say maybe just use whatever you can for a one-handed weapon, but once you get to endgame, try to get the dexterity up through items, enough to use Phase Blade. As far as shields, let me tab over. Let's see. Okay. So you need 138 strength to wield Berserker's Axe, and most other strength-based one-handed weapons. Not all of them, but most. So that does put you within reach of a Zakharum shield. But you will notice that Zakharum shield doesn't have the block chance of the Tarj and Rondash, because it's only 2252. The two up there are 3060, 2850. So given that you're not going to get plus block percent from Phoenix Runeword, it is a good idea to use a high percent base block shield. I guess it wouldn't hurt to use a Zakharum shield if you wanted to do that, or a Kara shield if you really wanted to. It just depends on how you want to do the build. Someone can quote me if I get this wrong, but if my memory is correct, the Zakharum shield is plus Paladin skills. If I'm correct on that, then that's not a huge deal, because like I said in the Paladin build, plus to all skills really doesn't do much for the build, even with the change, because at the end of the day, it's just more damage, which you already do enough of. So if I remember right, the Rondash and Tarj are plus to all resistances. That would be far more valuable than the plus skills, because of how much you're maximizing your fire and lightning resist. And not only that, it makes it more feasible to use a yellow amulet and ring for plus dexterity, because then you won't have to be as concerned as using, say, Metal Grid or Mara's Kaleidoscope, or one of the many other examples of plus all resistances. So I would for sure say that a Rondash or Tarj would probably be more valuable than Zakharum Shield, assuming that I have things correct. And of course, you're going to use them for crafting Phoenix. And that's how you're going to go with this particular Paladin build. Now, that's just the equipment. The abilities are going to be changed as well. Other than that minor change to the weapon, and also the addition of a shield, you do need to be aware that there is going to be a change in skills, because you are going to be going down to Holy Shield. That does unlock the option of using Blessed Hammer as your AoE versus Zeal. In the prior build, which was using Infinity and a Poleaxe, I was using Zeal as kind of the AoE, because, as I said with the build, it really just needs to drop targets as quickly as possible, and that's just for survivability. In this particular build, you do have a lot of survivability because of Holy Shield, having a shield, having insane resistances, and many other things. So this build's not really worried about survivability, or really trying to kill things as quickly. You can take your time with targets. So you could for sure use Blessed Hammer in place of Zeal. Just be aware that there are 3 monsters in the game that are resistant to magic or immune to it. There's the Pit Lords, I think it's the Yetis, and that Mage Knight, I think is the 3rd one. Somebody can double check me on that, but just be aware that there are 3 targets that are completely immune to magical, which means that Blessed Hammer would not be effective there. You would have to resort to something else, because in the case of, well, Pit Lords, they're immune to elemental as well, so the only way you can deal with Pit Lords is by physical damage, which means Zeal. Zeal would be the most effective way of dealing with them. But as far as the other stuff is concerned, you should be able to get around the magic resist. Be aware of that. So yeah, you can definitely use Blessed Hammer if you want to, but I would personally recommend Zeal. Same as the last build, just because of how versatile Zeal is and how often you'd be able to use it. So yeah, that's kind of the Paladin. Let me get into the Amazon now. Let's see, it is not this tab, it is... Oh, there it is. Okay. Right, so for the 2 following alternative Amazon builds, I will be using the War Pike in this build. It's going to be a bit more difficult to make it work because of its lower attack speed. In the Amazon builds, I did point out that the Matriarchal Spear has a better attack speed than the War Pike, and that's true. So I'm going to have to swing things a little bit differently to make that slower attack speed work. That means using Breath of the Dying. It's the highest % attack speed on the rune wards that I'm aware of, and it has some other goodies in there. So both builds are going to be using a War Pike. Just how they handle their ranged weapon varies. Real quickly, I don't know if I mentioned in the prior recording with the Amazon, but just in case, I want you to be aware that the ranged side of the build isn't going to be your main source of attack. When I made these builds, I did it in such a way that I was accounting for the early game as well as the late game. Having the ability to kite something can certainly help you in certain circumstances leading up to Hell difficulty. By the time that you reach your end build, you should be at a point of sustainability to where you really shouldn't need your ranged anymore, but you can certainly use it as like a tool or a way around a certain problem. For example, there is a portion of the Mephisto boss level where there's this platform. That platform, if you have teleport, you can teleport to it and use either spells or ranged and completely cheese Mephisto. Mephisto has no way to attack you from that platform. So yes, you can certainly cheese the crap out of the game with ranged, and Amazon happens to be in a very good position to use ranged, so it kind of works out because you get early kite and then you can use it as a tool later on. But with that out of the way, let's go and talk about where the 2 alternative builds differ. So the Magic Arrow alternative is going to be using Wind Force. Let me tab over. Okay. The difference in comparison to Wind Force versus the Matriarchal Bow from the prior build is Wind Force will do a lot more damage. However, it's going to require a bit more to make it work, because like with the Matriarchal Bow, it's possible to craft it into a number of things, whether that be Faith, Breath of the Dying, or what have you. But Wind Force is going to be more specific towards damage, which it's not a big deal at the end of the day because Magic Arrow is really a low conversion rate anyways, so you're not really increasing your damage all that much with Magic Arrow going from a crafted Matriarchal Bow to Wind Force, but I mean, the extra damage is kind of nice, so for sure you can make this work. It's just going to require a little bit more work, and that's going to involve quest lines. There is a quest with... let me just pull up my notes, make sure I have this right. Yeah, it's Larzuk. There's a quest with Larzuk, and he can socket an item for you. It's one socket, but it works on uniques. So what you would want to do in the alternative magic arrow build is if you are going to use Wind Force for the increased conversion to magical damage, then you're going to want to use that Larzuk quest for one socket so that you can put a Hell rune in. Let me tab over. Let's see. Hell will lower the requirement of the weapon by 20%. It's what Breath of the Dying does as well. So that's going to make it so you need 132 Dexterity instead of 164. Breath of the Dying on a War Pike also has 132. So that means you only need 132 Dexterity and 132 Strength. Now that's going to make you a little bit more specific than my other Amazon build, because the other Amazon build has enough Dexterity to wield more spears in this build, because there are certain spears that require more Dexterity than Strength. But assuming you can put up with the more specific nature of this, then you can definitely make a Wind Force alternative out of the build. So that's that one. Let me tab over. Let's see. Wind Force. Where is it? Okay. Let's see here. Okay. Okay. The other builds will use Demon's Arch as its main source of damage for range anyways. I mean, again, it's not going to be the focus of the build, but it's just there to kind of help you make that transition to endgame. But anyways, Demon's Arch is going to be a very different approach from Wind Force, because you're now going from Magic Arrow to Lightning Bolt, and I'll explain that in a minute. But yeah, so you would be pairing Demon's Arch with Phoenix. Remember, Phoenix increases your damage by a percentage, so actually this has more potential to do range damage than Wind Force does. That's just how the math works out. But again, it's part of that whole equation of the skills. The problem with the Amazon is all of her abilities are freaking lightning under the Javelin and Spear Tree, which means you don't have as much flexibility as the bow, which has access to magic damage, ice, fire, and even physical. So, and then another thing too you have to be aware of is as you level up from, the early days to your end game, you just don't have the quantity of ranged as you do with a Magic Arrow, because Magic Arrow makes it possible to never need ammunition again. Whereas with this, you would be forced to constantly get new javelins or whatever as you level, and that would be kind of annoying to deal with. I mean, you can do it, but just be aware that you don't have as much of a source of ammunition as the Wind Force alternative. Another thing too you have to be aware of is, again, pure lightning damage. So if you run into anything that's lightning immune or heavily resistant to lightning while you're leveling up, then you're pretty much screwed on the ranged front. You're going to be entirely reliant on your melee weapon to do some damage because you get jab. Jab is the physical damage. But anyways, yes, you would be pairing Demon's Arch with Phoenix. Now, let me explain why I've picked Demon's Arch over the other javelins. Where is it? There it is. Okay. If you'll remember, most Javazon builds, you were using Thunderstroke, because paired with the Circlet for minus enemy lightning resistances, this kind of takes it a step further with its minus lightning resistance. Now, when Javazon builds were running around, they had one alternative spirit to rely on besides Thunderstroke, and that was Titan. Titan's Revenge, yeah, there it is. So here's Titan's Revenge. The reason that this was an alternative for Javazon builds is because it has increased stack quantity, and it also has replenish quantity. That was some of the main reasons that they used it. Another reason, too, is the high damage, because you'll notice it does 79 to 212 physical thrown damage. So that's a pretty big deal, all things considered, because the Javelin side of the skills are conversion-based, whereas the Spear skills are addition. So that does help quite a bit. But Demon's Arch, just like Titan's Revenge, does replenish its quantity. There's just a very big difference in how they handle damage. Let me tab over in just a second. Let me scroll down first. So you'll notice other than physical damage, that's all this has to it. But Demon's Arch, while it may not do as much physical damage, it's not that far off. You'll notice it's 124 to 192 at its best. Titan's Revenge is 79 to 212. So it does more minimum damage, but less maximum damage. But then you have to look at this. Demon's Arch also adds fire and lightning damage. It's a dual elemental weapon, so it has the potential to do more damage than the Titan Javelin because of the fact that it's flinging 2 elemental damages, and also because it has increased attack speed. Let me tab back. So you will notice that Titan's Revenge doesn't even have attack speed. That means Demon's Arch is going to be a lot quicker to respond to a situation than Titan's Revenge would, while still maintaining that replenished quantity. So yeah, this is a really good thing, and especially when you're talking about Phoenix, because even though that fire damage is the most resisted, if you happen to run into an enemy that doesn't have fire resistances, and Phoenix would lower that, so Demon's Arch will do more damage than it would normally. So yeah, you would pair Demon's Arch with Phoenix, and that's how you would handle this particular build. Last thing I need to talk about, it's related to both builds. Or all three, I'm sorry. All three of my alternative builds are going to be using Harlequin Crest. Although in the Amazon build, it probably would be best to use Griffin's Eye if you can, but if you can't, Harlequin Crest is actually a very good alternative for defense. But yes, that's going to be one of the major changes to the builds, is I'm going to make that a little bit more of a thing with the builds, because like I said, it's got a really good amount of life to it. Damage reduction's pretty good. The Magic Find is just even better, so it really has a lot of stats. But yes, I want to make sure that that is going to be a thing of really all my builds, if I can help it. Now, I'll have to do some experimentation when the game fully releases, and assuming that they manage to fix everything, to see if your damage output is at an acceptable level without Griffin's Eye. If it is, then I would say just go Harlequin Crest all the time. But that's all I have. Thanks for listening.